Is America's Department of War at war with the press? Now, for decades, reporters with ID badges had unrestricted access to non-classified areas of the Pentagon, and this was to visit with officials. But on October 14th, dozens of journalists from more than 30 news outlets handed in their badges over new press rules and walked out. Here's Atlantic's Pentagon correspondent speaking to Al Jazeera.
About 50 of us that sort of walked out together, but overall hundreds of us turned in our badges because it wasn't just those who you see on camera, whose bylines you see, but cameramen, technicians, others who have supported our coverage also turned in their badges. The new rules said that we could not publish anything without Pentagon approval. If I'm agreeing that publicizing work that the Pentagon doesn't agree to is a potential national security implication, I think it's fair to fear that the next step would be to then charge reporters who publish information not authorized by the building.
And this policy is without precedent. America's 5 major broadcast networks released a joint statement saying why they refuse to accept these new rules. Media outlets say the policy violates their constitutional rights to freedom of speech and freedom of the press. Here is Yale Law School's David Schultz on PBS NewsHour.
It says that it's improper to solicit information if it has not been approved for release. But, what the Pentagon calls illegal solicitation, we would call news gathering. And more important than the label, soliciting information is an activity protected by the First Amendment. The place where reporters are being asked to sign has a large privacy notice across the top of it, making clear that the document can be used by the Pentagon in court. So I would say the obvious intent here is to intimidate and chill reporting on anything that's not officially disclosed.
And the changes to Pentagon reporting rules were first introduced by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. While previous guidelines fit on a single page, the new ones span 21 pages. Among the outlets to reject the new rules was Hegseth's former employer, Fox News.
Brett, this is actually quite breathtaking in terms of its implications for the free press. There is no precedent for what they're doing here.
What they're really doing, they want to spoon feed information to the journalists, and that will be their story. That's not journalism. Journalism is going out and finding the story and getting all the facts to support it.
General King went on to say that he trained military so they would not be intimidated by the media, but to welcome them, to see them as their conduit to the American people. Let's bring in our guests. Joining us is Caitlin Vogus, a senior advisor for advocacy from the Freedom of Press Foundation, and David Lapan, a retired colonel, and a former Pentagon spokesman. David, can you start by telling us about the history between the Pentagon and the press and why that link is important?
So a few points, and you had it right at the top of the program, that this is action by Secretary Hegseth is unprecedented. For decades, the media have operated inside the Pentagon, which is essentially the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense. That has been done through several administrations, both Democrat and Republican. It has been done through several secretaries of defense, and there is really no valid reason to change that relationship. Over the years, the Pentagon has welcomed having reporters in the building so that they could tell the accurate firsthand story of what the U.S. military does. And so, as some of the guests have pointed out, this will have a chilling effect on the ability for the American public to stay informed about what the Pentagon is doing.
Yeah, Caitlin, whatever we think about the politics, if you look at the old press score, there's Fox News, there's MSNBC, there's Newsmax, there's the New York Times, NPR, The Guardian, the Wall Street Journal. Across the spectrum, journalists walking out supported by their organizations. Most of these outlets have covered the Pentagon for decades. Caitlin, what did they find so troublesome about this new policy?
The breadth of the rejection of the policy really shows how shocking it is. I think the most troubling provision is that provision that says that journalists could have their press passes revoked if they report or rather, if they solicit information from government officials that the government might not want the public to know. And that really goes to the heart of journalism. The whole point of journalism is to solicit information, not just to take government officials at their word, but to ask hard questions in order to hold the government to account. And so by trying to restrict that in the policy, the government's trying to transform journalism into pure propaganda. And any journalist worth their salt is going to reject that. And that's exactly what the vast majority of the Pentagon press corps did.
David, doing this allegedly to rein in the quote-unquote disruptive press, it seems pretty rich since Hegseth was the same guy that shared highly sensitive messages about U.S. military strikes in Yemen on a Signal group chat that included a journalist. Have you heard any sort of reaction about these new Pentagon reporting rules from military officers or military press? I'm curious how they're reacting to it.
I have. I've heard from reporters, longtime Pentagon reporters that I worked with over many years when I was at the Pentagon. Also hearing from counterparts, colleagues on the military side. And it's unanimously panned. I have not heard anyone really speak in favor of this. They all have issues with it, as they rightly should. And as you point out, Secretary Hegseth violated security protocols very early in his tenure. And I think these restrictions are an effort by him to control information that he doesn't want to get out because it's embarrassing. It's not about classified information.
But there's so many instances in U.S. history about why journalists need that link with the Pentagon to hold officials accountable, to discover stories. Think about the Pentagon Papers or numerous other issues. So I'm just curious, David, are you confident that the press corps that walked out of the Pentagon will still be able to do their job effectively without being there on the premises?
I think they'll still be able to do their job effectively. They will lose some of the benefits of having that access, which is to provide context to their reporting. As Caitlin said, and as a former spokesman for the Pentagon, I didn't expect these reporters to take me and what I said at face value. Their job as journalists is to talk to me, to get my position as the spokesperson, to go to talk to other sources, and to provide a fully well-rounded story about what a particular issue is happening. So those reporters outside the building now will still be able to do their job, and they will do it very well. But this is putting unnecessary obstacles and barriers in their way. And again, the public will suffer because of the lack of context that being in the building was providing to those reporters.
Yeah, and now they're gone and someone else is in. Caitlin, Pentagon calling it the next generation of the Pentagon press corps. We're showing a graphic now of some of the outlets that have signed on to these new reporting rules. Can you tell us about who these outlets are and what it means for the future coverage of the Pentagon?
Yes, well, the few outlets that have signed on to the rules are perceived as being right-wing outlets. And I think the concern is that by replacing the national media outlets that have covered the Pentagon for decades, journalists that have a lot of expertise, with these outlets that are reporting from perhaps a right-wing point of view, that the government is trying to shape the coverage and what comes out, and to have it not be about necessarily the truth, but about what's favorable to the administration and to the Pentagon. And that's simply a disservice to the American people. So I hope that journalists who have rejected the policy and are no longer at the Pentagon will double down on their investigative reporting and continue to report, and perhaps report even in a more tough manner on the Pentagon going forward.
Yeah, and David, when you look at this list of who's the next generation of press corps at the Pentagon, do you feel like that maybe this was the end game all along for Hegseth to get these sort of legacy media out of the Pentagon and bring in some perhaps MAGA-friendly reporters?
I absolutely do. But two key points as well is I don't know that we will see reporters from those news organizations coming into the Pentagon, right? This whole idea was getting rid of Pentagon reporters who have workspaces in the office. A lot of these publications don't have a presence here in DC. It's unlikely that they're going to be sitting in those workspaces inside the Pentagon. The other key point is the Pentagon isn't holding press briefings. mean, one of the values that we had for having a press corps resident in the building is we could call them together at a moment's notice when there was breaking news. If there was a military operation going on, within 10 minutes, I could fill the briefing room with the reporters and we could talk about what was happening. You don't have that anymore. And I don't think these organizations, and as you said, the end game for Hegseth is to control the message through these right-wing organizations, but I don't, see them being in the building the way the press corps was, and there's no sense of them being there day in and day out if there's been this chilling effect on people that work at the Pentagon to not be allowed to talk to the press.
Yeah, and that probably suits them just fine because some of these outlets, they say in their own words that they don't do news, they do commentary. To do commentary, you don't have to do on-site reporting. Caitlin, real quickly, last May, Reporters Without Borders said the United States ranks 57th out of 180 countries on the Press Freedom Index, a historic low for the country. To our international viewers, how do you see these Pentagon rules fitting in with what else is going on with the media in the United States?
The rules are absolutely part of a disturbing trend against the press in the United States. We've seen attempts by the Trump administration to remove reporters from the White House press pool that they disagree with their reporting. We've seen attacks on journalists by the Federal Communications Commission in the United States. We've seen journalists being arrested while covering protests or assaulted by police while covering protests in the United States. So there is, I think, this very shocking decline in press freedom that Reporters Without Borders has been documenting. It's real. And it's unfortunate. And we need the American public to stand up and to say, this is not part of American values. This is not part of the First Amendment, and it has to stop.
All right. And David, one final note for people who think this might improve national security in the United States. Could you tell them about, why the press is important for the military?
Well, the first thing, and Caitlin mentioned it, the First Amendment. The irony here is those of us in the military swore an oath to protect and to defend the Constitution of the United States, which the First Amendment is a very prominent part of that. And so the irony is those of us that have been in conflict, have gone to war, have done everything we can over decades to protect the Constitution and the freedoms that it provides. And as Caitlin says, we are seeing those freedoms and freedom of the press certainly at the top of the list being degraded by this administration.
I'm sorry to say that's all we have time for, but I want to thank you so much, Caitlin and David, for your time and for your analysis. And that brings us to our quote of the week, and it comes from one of America's founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, a diplomat, a scientist, a patriot. And he said, quote, "Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety." That's it for this edition of Scoop. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned to Francis 24.